Welcome to Helping Today's Woman. I am your host, Dr. Kelly Williams. As always, this show is designed to help women become champions of their own health care. Last week we had a great discussion about vaccines. I thought that discussion was so important that we've carried it on to a second week. Tonight I am joined by the same panel that we had last week. We're going to further evaluate this whole idea of vaccines. I'd like to introduce the panel to you now. It's Dr. Brent Rosser, a pediatrician at the Murfreesboro Medical Clinic. Dr. Lee Bigham, a pediatrician at the Murfreesboro Medical Clinic. Dr. Kathy Dundon, a pediatrician at Goodlettsville Pediatrics in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. And this is Dr. Derek Johnson, a pediatrician at the Murfreesboro Medical Clinic. Now, I'm going to take just a second because I want to read these statistics. I think they're so important. Children entering kindergarten in the 2006-2007 school year, greater than 95% were up to date on their vaccinations. But interestingly, in a 2003 study was done that showed 37% of patients were under-vaccinated for greater than 6 months during their first 2 years of life. And 21% were considered severely under-vaccinated, meaning they were missing 4 vaccines for greater than 6 months. Now, I want to start off the discussion with Dr. Rosser, and I'd like to ask you, are we doing something wrong here? Because it seems like we're catching everybody up by the time they get older, but it seems like we're missing them young. What do you have to say about that?
Well, those are definitely worrisome statistics. We'd love for those all to be 100% on those studies, and I think probably why those percentages are the way they are is that a lot of parents in the last few years have been requesting to vaccinate their children in alternative schedules, meaning that they want to deviate from what is recommended and how we do vaccines. And there are different reasons for that. A lot of parents feel uncomfortable with their babies receiving vaccines. They have concerns about their development or their health when they receive those. And so sometimes they want to either postpone those vaccines and catch them up later, or they want to space them out a little more so they don't receive so many at one time, or they want to split up some of the combination vaccines. And so we miss some of those vaccines at early ages when we feel like they're the most important. But the parents understand that they need their vaccines to enter school when they're going to kindergarten, so they're okay with catching them up when they're older. They sometimes have problems when they're younger, and so we miss some of those vaccines early on, but by the time they're 5 years old, they're usually caught up.
And I want to turn it over now to Dr. Johnson. I want to ask you the question of, is it important that we are waiting until they're 5 years old? These alternative schedules, we're kind of waiting a little bit longer. Is that important? Are we not vaccinating them early enough?
Yeah, I definitely think that we need to vaccinate our kids with the schedule that's been set in place by the powers that be that look at different immunization studies and disease studies. However, the important thing to know is people that are getting getting vaccines on alternative schedules, at least they're getting their vaccines. So that's one of the most important things, at least they're getting their vaccines. But there are some cons to that too. One of the major things is that you're constantly always giving your child an immunization whenever they come to the doctor. So like say for instance, I have a child or I have a patient who brings their child in once a month to get a vaccine. So every time that child comes and pulls into the parking lot, that child's screaming and crying because they know that they're getting a shot when they come to see Dr. Johnson, which you would want your visit to be a happy visit instead of always constantly like a bad visit. So that's the first con. The second thing is that some of the diseases that are prevented at an early age. So let's say, for instance, Haemophilus influenza, that can cause epiglottitis, can cause meningitis, you can cause problems with hearing loss, and that should be prevented at a younger age than a child who gets those hip vaccines later on. It's important to get those vaccines at 2, 4, and 6 months, and then at 18 months like they should.
Now, Kathy, I want to turn to you now, because one of the things I thought was really interesting during one of the breaks that we were talking about is this whole idea of alternative vaccinations. And Derek brought up the fact that we're not necessarily treating them when we should be treating them. That these younger ages really do need to be vaccinated, and waiting is not always a good idea. What do you think about that?
The way, I don't think the public realizes how we make vaccine decisions, first of all. I think they think it's the government, and it's fun to think it's some governmental conspiracy. But the way vaccines are decided is there's a committee of scientists. It's called the ACIP Committee, Advisory Committee on Immune Practice. And they are our best minds across the country. It's an honor to sit on this committee. They get in a room when a new vaccine is licensed, and they figure out, well, when do we need to use it? What's the most vulnerable population? Who shouldn't be vaccinated? What's the risk-benefit? And then they come up with a schedule of when and how to protect America's children. And then some little person somewhere else says, well, that's great, I'll just do my own thing. As much as I know about vaccines, I can't outthink the Einsteins of the medical community. And if you met some of these people, I call them Mother Teresa Einsteins in one body. They've devoted their life to America's children and how to take care of America's children. And they're renowned in their field. There's several at Vanderbilt that I work with that are just amazing people. And they're making the decision. And then some person with a hundredth of their knowledge, the thousandth of their knowledge, decides to do their own thing, which leaves children vulnerable. It's like taking your seatbelt on and off instead of following the set shot schedule where you're totally protected. You decide, no, I'm going to spread it out, I'm going to drop this or that. You're putting gaps everywhere.
And we talked about this too. I think it was important, the fact that, you know, they're done specifically this reason because that's when the scientists decide that's the best time to do it. Now, I want to take a second. We're running out of time here on this segment, but I do want to talk to Dr. Bigham. Derek brings up a great point, and I wanted to bring it to you, and that's this whole idea of kids being afraid to go to the doctor because they're going to get a shot all the time.
Right.
What do you have to say about that?
Well, and I mean, I think for years parents have threatened their children with going to the doctor to get a shot as some form of punishment. And we see that pretty frequently in the office. I've laughed and said that they're really not scared of me, they're more scared of my nurse, and which is unfortunate because she's a lot nicer than I am. But we kind of laugh about that in the hall, but it's true. I mean, I was scared of my doctor growing up and ended up having him as one of the attending physicians when I went to medical school, and he was great. He was a really nice guy and taught me a lot. But I do think that trying to make a good office environment for the children definitely helps. Just in their formative years, if they're not scared to come to the doctor, it's easier for the parents to bring them and get their vaccines.
Well, we've had a great discussion about alternative schedules. We're going to take a break now. When we come back, we're going to continue to talk about some new vaccines that have been brought out in the last several years. We'll see you after these messages.